We're the Writing Bastards going to talk about villains in fantasy and sci-fi. And I'll kick it off with two villains that I think are good in different ways and sort of embody what I like in villains, what I think makes them good. So the first one is I don't know if Naruto counts as fantasy sci-fi. I think it roughly does, sort of
Could fit
fantasy,
it. You could fit it.
but I think Itachi is an amazing villain. And for anyone who doesn't know, like basically his story is he like kills his own clan, joins this group of villains, and I'm gonna list some spoilers, but it's like, dude, Naruto's been out for a long time, so I think it's okay to
I think you're
generally
good.
discuss what happens. So he kills his own clan, joins a group of evil people, but then you come to find out that he had a reason for doing it, and he was secretly a good guy the whole time. And I actually really like that, where if it's done well, where someone is really bad and really competent, but then you understand why they're bad, and that gives
Hmm.
like a lot of, I don't know, kind of puts you in their emotional shoes, makes you feel something. So it's just done so well with him. You just get like a really good depth of emotion, like a lot of empathy. So that's like an example of like a complex villain that I think is pretty interesting. And then I think on the other end of the spectrum, there's villains that are like a stereotypical villain, but really well done. And so like what I think embodies that is in the third Malazan Book of the Fallen book. There's this Panny and Seer character, and one of the main villains.
Hmm.
And they're basically like stereotypical evil. Like they're invading an area, they want to take people over, they're spreading this ideology, and they're very grotesque. Like they have all this disgusting power and magic that creates like grotesque monsters. And the armies of the Pandian Seer are like basically like cannibalistic hordes. And
Oh,
so
oh,
it's good because it's like they're definitely evil. You're definitely rooting for the good people to eradicate this evil character and their group. And they're just so repulsive. And that's something that I think you got to go all in if you're gonna just make them evil. And I think if you're gonna
hmm.
do like a complex evil character, then you can kind of like think about, like different ways to make the audience maybe have sympathy for them. But I think when it's like in
Yeah.
between is when it doesn't work for me. So that's what I've noticed so far, but I don't know if you have any
I could
thoughts
agree
on that.
with that. I think the problem is kind of what you were saying, is that when you get people that are like a middle ground, kind of like they're good, but they're bad, but they're not really neutral. They're kind of like, it's a weird, I can see what you're saying. I'm trying to think of any books I've read where they've done that a ton. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but yes, I understand that because that to me that bothers me too. Um, because I think people just like in general characters to have conviction. I think your characters need to have convictions. I That's very normal. The only time I think you don't have a character with conviction is if it has to deal with the story arc, and but that's entirely different than a villain. That would be more so they don't have any beliefs or anything that they care about, maybe, from an event that happened. So I would agree with villains. I think, I don't know if this really counts as a villain. You can tell me your thoughts. But one series that I feel like really does kind of the subversion, it like kind of said, not as good as Itachi, but is Dune. I really like what they did with Dune, the books. Because book one, Paul, like this is all just gonna be spoilers. People just know I'm just gonna probably spoil everything. So I'm just fair warning if you haven't read Dune, or you haven't seen all the movies or whatever. Um, Dune one, Paul Atreides is the basically the Messiah. He saves he's gonna save the people. He does save the Fremen, and they take back Arrakis. I think he does become emperor in that one because he marries Irulan. And so he's like the hero, right? That's like the typical archetype hero story. Like, nice, like we won. Then you skip to Dune Messiah, which is 10 years later, and he's having issues and problems. because the whole idea of Dune is like, yeah, messiahs and like rebellions like are kind of actually easier, and it's almost like this upward action because when you actually have to run a country or a world in that sense, and you have to be this leader now, you start losing that luster to people because you have to start making policies, rules, and at the end, Paul almost becomes like not a good guy. Like you're kind of like, oh, because even he in the first book, he has the prescience where he says, oh, I think like this jihad is a bad thing. Like we're gonna end up killing lots of people, and he doesn't want that to happen. But it kind of there's no way out of it. So I almost feel like he is kind of in a way a subverted villain where and he kind of realizes there's no other way. So you have to tell him if you think that counts or not, because I don't view him as a traditional hero. He is in book one, but his whole life story is more of a tragic hero that I think almost could like trend into a villain because of all the thing. Like you think of a like a I don't know if there's a genocide, but a jihad where they went to worlds and killed people and took over and made people believe in their religion. To me, that's kind of like villain territory almost. Kind of like I don't know. You tell me what you think. That's one that I liked a lot.
Yeah, I think it could be. I feel like traditionally villains are sort of meant to create problems for the characters, and
Okay.
so it's interesting like in Dune because it's not always from that perspective, but
Hmm.
I think it's valid. And I mean, we talked about Star Wars characters last week,
Hmm.
but this reminds me of Darth Vader. Like he's another one of
Hmm.
these like sort of like they become good,
Mm.
or
Hero,
I
villain,
guess
villain,
I guess I
hero.
shouldn't say
Yeah.
they like at some point they're good, at some point they're evil. They
Yes.
do
Yeah.
both, and I
Yes.
think Darth Vader's a great example, right?
Yeah.
Like
The best example, probably, to be honest.
super scary, competent, like definitely has evil aesthetics, but
Hmm.
then the way he turns good in the end does make sense. Like I find it like satisfying
Hmm.
and believable. It's not like
Yes.
sort of like a lame change of heart. Um,
Yes. A lame
so
change of heart.
yeah, I think that's a really strong um type of evil character. One type of
Yes.
evil character that I think is often executed poorly is the mysterious villain.
Okay.
Um, so
Name a few. I'm trying to even think of mysterious evil. Like what? Like
so
Loki?
what
Or
I mean
like,
by that is you know that they're evil, but you don't really know a lot about them. And it's kind of vague.
oh, so like
So
kind of like Sauron? I
Sauron,
won't go into that
um,
rant for the sake of this. I'm
I mean,
avoiding that.
if you want to give a
Avoiding.
summary of why you don't like
No,
Sauron, you can. But
no,
like
avoiding.
another
Avoiding.
example of it is Game of Thrones TV show specifically,
Okay.
um, the Night King or whatever. Really
Yes.
cool villain
Yes.
concept.
Hmm.
Adds
Yes.
like a tension and a general fear to
Hmm.
to the story and like to the politics that I find really satisfying. And I think it's better. It makes Game of Thrones better than like House of Dragon, for example, because like
Yeah.
at least the first couple of episodes of the first season of House of Dragon, like
Hmm.
there's no overarching evil, like there's no problem, and so it literally just feels like you're watching like court politics. Whereas Game of
You're
Thrones
not wrong.
always had this looming threat, and that added a lot.
Mm.
And the problem is in the end, it was just very unsatisfying.
Okay.
Um, and so that's like I think they can kind of do it, but I just don't know if I've
Mm.
seen like a super
Good
mysterious
mysterious
villain
villain.
be implemented super well. Maybe like Darth Maul is like one that you
Mm.
know less about, and you don't get to know him much. But at least they have like
Yeah.
a cool fight, It's like the conclusion is cool. Whereas
Yeah.
I feel like Night King just, ends up not being interesting at all. Um,
Yeah. Well,
so
I think
anyway.
just from our tier list, we kind of have Star Wars is just good for a lot of reasons, but the aesthetic was just off the charts. So I think that's the one thing we have to realize with Star Wars is if you wrote it as a book, Darth Maul probably would have really sucked. but the fact that you have the aesthetic of him just being this friggin' awesome, evil looking bad guy just trumps. It's like just too good. Um, Mysterious bad guys, oh yeah, I think I can tell you what I hate more than mysterious bad guys is like or evil villains. I should say mysterious villains, and then kind of like the mysterious bad boy is what I hate even worse, dude. Even worse.
What,
Like,
what does that
oh,
mean?
dude, it's it's I feel like it's a huge trope in like romantasy. I haven't read romantasy, but a lot of the like my coworkers
You're
in
not the target audience?
I'm really not. I hate to break it. I can't stand them, but like I know a lot of people that read them, and so just out of conversation, because I'm willing to talk about it. I'm not like, no, no, can't talk. You disgusting. No, no. I'm happy to learn and just hear about them. But it's like I feel like that's the trope. Is it's this guy who's kind of like angry, pissed off, quiet. He generally has long curly hair that's like brown or black and maybe like some perfect stubble that no man on earth has. And he doesn't say a lot. He's kind of a dirtbag to the main character who's like a female or someone that just I feel like a lot of times it's an insecure main character. I could be wrong. Once again, I don't read these, so I'm just kind of saying from what I've been told. Um, but yeah, it's like they're mysterious. They don't have these really cool their backstory isn't really well known. I think like the Divergent series, that's a book series where it's the same thing. He's like edgy and he's kind of like a pissed off dude, and we gotta focus on the goal. But then as she opens him up, he's this like teddy bear dude, and I'm like, oh, it drives me nuts, dude. Uh, but mysterious villains. Back to the actual point is, I think the one that I can think of that is poorly executed still is Sauron. I can't like it's just always gonna my default. His S tier drip is amazing, but he's got like just like there's so much more. Maybe if I read the one book, I cannot pronounce the name, the Silmarillion or whatever. Maybe if I read
Yep.
that, I would be like, oh, I like Sauron 1,000 times more. So I like this will be a eventually maybe I will like him. Maybe he'll redeem himself in my eyes, but I think he's one that is just I didn't like the mysterious villain trope. My favorite villain, to be honest, I think is the Baron Harkonnen and Fade Rautha in Dune. They're just gross and evil. Like the Baron's like just this like corpulent, fleshy dude that he's just this like he's like all of like the seven deadly sins put to one. Like just they put him all into this dude and he's just gross. Like even the movies, when I watch the movies, I'm like, dude, like it does it justice. I'm like, that is exactly what I'm thinking. Like it's gross, like evil, twisted, and Fade Ralph is like creepy too. I loved him in Dune. I mean, like when I saw the movies, the old and the new ones, I was like, man, this is pretty much like how I would have pictured them. It's just really just sick and twisted people. I mean, like I don't even know how to explain it. They were just great because Fade Ralph was intimidating because he's young and fast. He's a great warrior, and then but you have the Baron who's none of those things, but his presence is just ominous. I mean, in the movies when I watch this, I was like, dude, this is exactly how I felt in the book. Like they nailed the aesthetic in the new Dune movies, I think. Really getting that atmosphere too was amazing because I'm like, this dude is creepy and yeah, I love him. Best one of the best villains because he's not really like a physical. I feel like a lot of villains kind of fall under the trope of being like a physical villain, kind of like Darth Vader, right? He can hack his own, he can fight. But I like the Baron because he's kind of like the Emperor in Star Wars, where you you don't they don't do a ton of fighting. They just have a presence that you're like, ooh, this is not a play around kind of presence. This is serious. And I think that makes a really good villain too, is they don't have to be physical. They don't have to be, some great swordsman or like even mage or warlock. Sometimes they can just be these really twisted, corrupt, almost like a politician figure. I think that, Yeah, I think presence. I think that's what makes a good villain to me. If I really could just boil it down, is their presence. And I think the Baron in that show and in the books just like spot on. So,
Yeah, I this reminds me of when we were talking about Tywin Lannister.
oh
Um,
yes, he's a great one
is
too. Yeah.
in TV show just
Hmm.
yeah, he's pretty much a political figure, but so like he's just aggressive, like intimidating, just feels
Hmm.
really real. And
Let's.
is probably more memorable than a lot of the other people that like were maybe more like directly villains in that show.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I agree. What do you think about like the Joker? Because that's sort of like a famous
Mm.
villain, and it's he's unique because he's sort of just like wants chaos, like a chaotic evil, and there's not a lot of other rationale. Um, I
Ooh.
think he's executed exceptionally well in
Hmm.
like Dark Knight trilogy. But it's really hard to pull off, you know?
Hmm.
Like I can't think of too many other examples where like a truly chaotic evil villain ends up being like really good and really scary. Maybe No Country for Old Men,
Oh, he's a good one. No, that's a
right?
good
Like
one.
he's
That is
kind of the
A
same,
class, S
kind of the
tier
same,
movie.
like
Yeah.
crazy, but like doesn't like
Dude, it's the
there's not a
haircut.
lot of there's
It's that bowl
not a
cut,
lot of
dude.
punching.
That's what it is. Dude, it's kind of like a psycho haircut, to be honest. Like the dude, he has an intimidating presence. Let me just see that goofy. It reminds me of when I was growing up, there's a show, Ned's Declassified, and there's
Uh-huh.
a coconut head. Dude, like that's what it reminds me of, but only like a really twisted version.
I think the actor was like, yeah, I went like months like without being able to properly date while I had this. Like
It doesn't
just
surprise
like a
me, dude.
sacrifice.
It's a rough
Um,
haircut. Anyway, yeah. That's a good one. No Country for Old Men. That's a really good villain. That's
but those
chaotic
are the
evil.
main two I think of where they're just kind of evil
Mm,
because they're crazy and unpredictable. But it's I
hmm.
feel like that's sort of contained within smaller stories. Like
Yeah.
they can't be in like an epic storyline because it doesn't make sense for them to have like long coherent plans, I feel like.
Yeah, well, there's a lot I could say about this. Back to your comment on the Joker. I think um, even other actors who have played him, I don't think pull him off very well. I think Jack
Mm.
Nicholson did decent, but I think Heath Ledger still, he was the pinnacle Joker. Because I think he gave the Joker a different side. Because I think the problem so many people fall into is with chaotic evil is they're just nuts. They're crazy. They're just killing to blowing up, doing whatever. It reminds me of Junkrat from Overwatch. Like they're just these psycho dudes and they just want like pyromaniac explosions. And to me, that isn't necessarily a good chaotic evil. That's a trope that I think so many chaotic evils have been stuck into. Because if I really were to think about it, what made the Joker good is he had a presence, a very unsettling presence. And it wasn't just the makeup, it's how he walks, how he holds himself. Like he walks into a room, doesn't even care, doesn't even, nothing phases him. And even the way he talks, it's not like a chaotic, evil kind of crazy talk. It's very coherent, it's very clear. And I think that what's the best about him in The Dark Knight is he is actually extremely smart. Even in the comics with Batman, you actually find out the Joker has an IQ that matches Batman's. That's why
Mm.
he's his like arch nemesis is because the Joker is as smart as Batman. But on the it's like the flip side, right? He's just the opposite of Batman. Batman's kind of like order and good with a high IQ where he is, chaos with a high IQ. And because in The Dark Knight, it kind of really showed that. that even when Batman was trying to do stuff, the Joker had like a plan on top of a plan on top of a plan on like he just layers of these strategies where he doesn't have to say he's intelligent, but just by you like as an audience observing this layering, you're like, this dude is not dumb. He knows what he's doing. And I think that's what makes chaotic evil good. They can kind of be crazy and funny almost and just kind of like the Joker. They can be that, but I think you got to avoid the trope of they just want chaos for chaos. I think the Joker did want chaos, but I think his bigger point was to prove that like humans are just generally evil and will always make like the self-serving choice, right? Like when they're all on the boat or whatever, that scene, and you could like sacrifice a certain people and you will live or the other people will die. It's kind of like Squid Game. I think that was his whole message is that like people will choose to save themselves even if they have to kill people. That's what made him so good, is he was chaotic evil, but he had a purpose. Too many times chaotic evil don't have a purpose. They don't have a theme. Like I think most books even you can look at like main characters, they're very thematic, right? But chaotic evil, I think people just sometimes want the crazy unhinged villain, but they don't give him a purpose, right? I think that's the shortcoming, but that's where I think Heath Ledger's Joker really shined through all of that was because he had a purpose, he was chaotic evil, and he was even like willing to share about himself. But you don't know if it was true or not because he always is kind of the story changes enough. I think that's why he was a good villain is just like his strategies, he was very layered. He had all these different portions of him that you're like, wow, he's not just crazy. He's actually really smart. Oh, maybe he had like this really horrible childhood and that's why he's here, but we don't really know. I think it came down to he was a really well written by I think Christopher Nolan wrote him really well. That's why he did so good is that character had a really great writing on top of great acting on top of a script that gave him not just you're just gonna blow stuff up to blow stuff up. No, you're gonna have a purpose. Like even with Harvey Dent, he showed that he could corrupt people and make them choose wrong. And that's actually that to me even screams more of how good of a villain he is because he not only took like the hero guy and made him evil, like that's huge. I mean, he did other stuff too, but I think that was the big thing. Other than the people he killed and the trying to prove that humanity generally always makes the wrong choice, he showed that you can take even the greatest person and put them under enough pressure and circumstance and give them a bad choice, they might make it. But sorry, yeah, that was my massive rant on it.
Yeah. I thought of one more really iconic villain that I like, and it's Arthas from Warcraft. Um,
Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah, really good one too. Yeah.
because
Wow.
it's basically the story of like a good character's descent into corruption.
But he
And
makes the
I,
choice even for a noble reason too, doesn't he?
yeah, I
When
mean,
he
well,
takes
it's
the blade, I believe.
there's some goodness in him, but he definitely gets manipulated multiple times, and things
Mm,
go from bad to worse.
mm,
So it's just an interesting story to follow because it's like he starts out as a paladin, which, has holy magic, and it's like
yeah.
sort of this arbiter of light and goodness. And then,
Hmm.
like the city gets like infected by the plague, and so then they're like, oh, we need to like kill the people before they become zombies or whatever, right?
Mm,
And it's just like there's some of these like gray area choices that he has to make.
yeah.
Um, and again, it's kind of similar as like the characters who are, secretly good or whatever in the end, where you just
Hmm.
feel complex emotions when you see their character development. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, and then in the end, basically just goes to the Frozen Throne and sort of becomes one with sort of a chaotically evil entity. which it's not
Yeah.
like the worst thing, but like
Yeah.
definitely not like how his character should have ended up. Um,
Mm-mm.
but I think it's really unusual because I think most stories try to follow more proper patterns where like there's characters that are definitely good. It's not like question if they're good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like the good characters don't do much bad stuff, and then there's characters that are definitely bad and they kind of go against each other,
Yes.
and then good triumphs. And it's
Mm.
not common to have like I think a book story that plays with that too much. I think that's more of like a video
Yeah.
game thing maybe because the story is less of an important element um
I'm trying to
in
think.
games. So
I'm sure
because
there's books that have had to
like
do
the
it though.
Arthas example is like you for it to be good in a book, I think you need another good character that's like also a main character, and
Mm.
like then one of their friends becomes more evil over time. Like you can't just have the main character become evil and have it end that way, because then that's like
Hmm.
kind of demoralizing. Like you have to follow like a Naruto path where it's like Sasuke, right? Like becomes more evil and then Naruto
Mm.
becomes good. Like that works, but you have to have like some good
Mm.
character that stays good, I think. So I think
Okay.
that's why you don't see it too much.
Yeah, I know a lot of books. There's books where I can think of off the top of my head, they go from kind of like a twisted individual or a corrupt individual to being like the good guy. I feel like that's a huge book trope is kind of the unlikely hero or the hero that was a bad guy that became a good guy. I think that's a big one. Um, I'm just trying to think because I think you could do that pretty easily in a book where you have a main character and you subvert it to them becoming the bad guy. And I don't think it would be necessarily you'd need another character. I think the problem with that I can just like automatically come off the top of my head is more of you are introducing a book and when you give it to the audience for the first time, they're getting expectations set up in the book on the first several pages, the first several chapters. And when you heavily subvert it, that might just cause them to be like, what? This is like not the book I was reading. So I think that's maybe why books have a harder time is because you make promises and set expectations at the beginning of the book. And as you change that, if you change it too much, I think that's where people tend to be like, oh, I was set up and this is not the book I wanted. Maybe they would like it, it could potentially be liked, but I think that's why video games can do it more though, especially like Warcraft, because Warcraft is you're like up here. Your viewpoint is almost kind of like a god perspective, right? You're like looking down. So you don't necessarily, there's like the main characters, the lesser characters, and you just kind of see everything. And I think that's why it works. Even in video games, once again, you're like kind of that god's eye perspective where you're just almost feels like you're observing a civilization or a people, right? Books tend to
Yeah,
feel
the
more, even third person books feel more personal. Like books just feel way more like you're living in their shoes, or even first person, you are in their shoes. I think that's why, maybe. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just think the gameplay element makes like the story less front and center, so it's fine. Like you're gonna play the game
Yeah.
because it's fun, but books definitely are.
It's Warcraft 3. We just like it. There's
Yeah.
no getting around. It's just too. It's like Warhammer. No one cares. It's just sick. Yeah,
Yep.
so true.
Yeah, that this is so uh, for villains in the books I'm writing, something that I think about a lot is I think it's tempting for me as a writer to make the villains a little bit more gray and to like have the good people be questioning if they're doing the right thing and like just make all the characters a little more gray because I find that to be like a little more unique and I enjoy that sometimes. But I think I'm gonna go back and change like my latest drafts to make things actually a little more clear. Like the bad people are
Hmm.
actually really bad and the good people are really good and there's like a satisfying payoff. Because I think if it's too gray, it's hard to have stronger payoffs. So I may try to come back and do like more of like a gray good versus evil book in the future, but I think it's hard to do. Like Malazan Book of the Fallen's like an example of that, where there's
Hmm.
still totally evil characters, and so that's like something that is feels more non-negotiable. But the good characters do sort of wonder, like what's right, and they're put in tough situations a lot. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of like
For
neutral
sure.
characters, and you don't really know like what side they're on. And that works for some people, but it doesn't work for everyone. So it is trickier to pull off. And I think also in Malazan Book of Fallen's like the characters have a lot of inner monologue, like it's very philosophical. And so if you're good at like putting that onto paper, then I think it can work. But if it's more like they're genuinely like you just can't tell if they're like too good or evil and you don't explore that enough, it can be sort of unsatisfying. So it sounds like some feedback I got like on my
Hmm.
second book that you've read is like it basically ends on kind of a low note. And it's not
Hmm.
as like triumphant, like you don't like feel as much satisfaction. Because I'm
Yeah.
sort of writing the characters as being a little bit conflicted about how things end. And I'm like,
Hmm.
I think it should be actually a little bit more of like some clear payoff and like progress.
Hmm.
But I've been thinking about that for my own books.
Okay. So many thoughts. Um, yeah, so I wouldn't say, here's the only thing I would say to your book. I'm not opposed to a turdy ending. I'm not opposed to a just total crap. Man, this sucks ending. I'm not opposed to that. I mean, like there's some books I know off the top of my head that ending made me literally get off my butt, drive down to Barnes and Noble and buy the third book because it was like, oh, it's such a terrible ending. I need to know. So there is merit to the terrible ending. But the reason why those books, the terrible ending, hooked me so hard was because it was like going all this battle, this action, all of a sudden we're at the end, and it's this like really happy, triumphant moment at the end. And everyone's happy, we're celebrating, and then all of a sudden boom, the bad guys were disguised. They like shoot a ton of people. People get killed. Main character gets captured. At the very end, the dude he thought was dead walks up to him and he's like, "Remember me?" End. Like, oh, it's
Mm,
such a That's why I think the bad endings can pay off is because you have such a happy. It's like you've won, right? You basically set the audience up to believe, hey, we had a happy ending. Look, the main character, the heroes are winning. They won actually. And then in the last page or two, you just throw a wrench. So I think that's my only thing I would just say to you, even is just as long as your bad ending has merit that's hooking people into the next book and it does have that happy ending, I think it's fine to have it be twisted into the bad ending at the very last 5 pages or so. If it fits. I would say don't do it just for the sake of it. Don't do it just to get people hooked. Do it because it's going to fit and it makes sense. Because the books that I'm thinking of off the top of my head that do that, it fit so well because it helped. It almost played really hand in hand with the characters' story and their arc, and I think that was a huge why it just was so awesome. Like literally, I think it's one of my favorite books of all time because it was like just such a middle finger ending that you're like, oh, dang. I mean, I've never had to go buy a book right after finishing the second one. I can usually be like, I'm good. Not with this one. I had to know. I had to immediately start reading the third one. I was like, even traffic was irritating. I'm like, get out of the way. I gotta go buy the third book. Move. Yeah, it was gnarly, but I think that is the one exception to that. But anyway, back to kind of the other stuff about villains, particularly in writing. Gray villains, I think people actually get confused, the readers do, about gray villains because I don't think gray villains are actually ever gray. I think it's only the way they're portrayed because if you look at most villains, they are evil. They want things that are bad. Um, But the reason why we feel like they're gray is because how they portray themselves to the audience, right? I mean, like if I was a bad person, I'm not gonna be like, I don't know, maybe I'd be if you, I feel like most bad people, like, hey, I'm a bad guy. You don't just go around announcing, like, I'm a bad guy. I'm gonna kill a ton of people. I'm gonna do horrible things. I want blood, rain, terror, chaos, and horror to just fill this land, and I'm gonna sit on a throne of bones. I don't think anyone is gonna be that. Like, that's a pretty confident bad guy. Like, you're probably gonna get shut down pretty quick running around like that. Like, just don't think it's gonna bode well for you. But I think it's because you have most of these bad guys that say their rationalization is really good. Like they're almost so good at like almost like they're lying to themselves and lying to everyone that they rationalize why they did things, right? I think that's what makes them great is their rationalizations because let's say you have a bad guy in a book who slaughtered thousands of people and the main character gets there and he's like, I'm gonna kill you because you killed thousands of people. You deserve this kind of a thing. And then the bad guy's like, that's why you're here? Because of that? He's like, didn't you know that they started a rebellion and slaughtered innocent people? Didn't you know that this group of people that I killed were enslaving others, that I'm the last of my own kind because they killed my people? I think that is one book that I can't remember what it was so good because the hero and the bad guy were both the last people of their like race or their species, whatever, and they both had been slaughtered, right? So the bad guys killed. I try to remember how it worked. Like the bad guy was slaughtered by these people, right? So then he gets vengeance and slaughters them, but then that motivates that hero, right? But then the hero
Yeah.
finds out, like, dude, we're the same person almost, right?
Sounds
Do
like
you know
some
what book it is?
Coriantumor versus Shiz type of
What book is
battle.
really? Really?
Well, you know what I mean. The last two surviving people, you know what I mean?
Oh, dude. Oh, I didn't even think about that. No, you think you
That's how it
wow.
goes. That's how it goes.
I really didn't know. I'm like, what was this story? Because it was really cool. Wow.
I don't know.
I thought it
I'm
was a
sure there's
fantasy book. I mean, maybe it is. I don't
I'm
know.
sure there's a different story that just also applies.
Maybe that's funny.
Um,
No, thanks. But
well,
anyway, yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
I think that's sort of a common villain type of, there's some rationalization and you can like kind of get behind it. That's very
Yeah.
common. I think in movies, especially, that's been really common. Like
Yeah, it's gotten way more popular.
they always have to have some rationalization. And I'm sort of like, it's good when it's good, but I prefer bad people to be like unquestionably evil and have like a little bit more of like an evil aesthetic to them. Um,
Hmm.
that's just a personal preference, but I
Well,
think
I
it's
think the
like,
problem with
yeah.
movies is it's over-explained. There's too many reasons, right? It's like you almost have to believe. It's almost like, dude, are you trying to make them good? Because I think the bad guys need a touch of rationalization to why they're doing what they're doing, right? I mean, even in real history, I feel like most people you could consider bad had some reasoning as to why they thought what they were doing was a good thing, right? Because if you're a bad guy and you know you're doing bad stuff, like, I don't know. Like maybe I'm just weird, but I feel like it's kind of hard to like you almost have to start lying to yourself. It kind of like erodes you, right? I think I
I
just like
think,
complex bad guys. I think that's more of my thing is I like guys that are they're evil, but almost like an Arthas. I think Arthas is my favorite kind of bad guy. Is a guy that wasn't necessarily maybe doing it out of evil reasons, but it just evolved that way and he kind of like you just get stuck in it. I think that's one thing that I like about books is when a character makes a choice, they get the consequence and they don't just get freed of it. They have to then deal with it. Because some authors will do that where you have the guy who makes a bad choice and then it kind of just goes away, right? Oh, the main character had to make a bad choice, but he's
yeah.
still a good guy and it goes away. Like I think
Um,
that's what I loved about Arth, this dude is made a bad choice and it's just kind of like got worse
Well,
and worse.
would you really consider like Baron Harkonnen to be like a complex bad guy? Like I feel like he's a little more
Hmm.
straightforwardly bad, but like is it like I think bad guys that are straightforward, they have like reasoning that's basic, like they want to like control or like expand their group of people or like something like that, which
Yes.
it's not a bad reason per se, but it's portrayed in a way that you know that it's not good and you don't want to be
Hmm.
on their side because they're like an aggressor or like really revolting. Um, so
Yes.
I don't know.
No, no,
I
I
guess
would
it depends
say,
on the setting. Like you can only use that in certain
mhm,
stories, I think. But yeah.
yeah. No, he's definitely not. I would label him as not a complex. I would 100% agree with you. I think why I like, to me, I think he's a little bit of a complex villain, not necessarily because he's like, I'm doing this for the good. It's kind of because he's evil. He's just, but he's not really, to him, it's not doing it for evil, right? To me, he just kind of is a person that wants expansion and power, right? And I
Hmm.
don't think that is a trope even uncommon of good people, especially in Dune. Dune is very full of characters that are like these political figureheads who want power. I mean, it's very much kind of like when we in history, when nations were taking over nations, right? I mean, the good guy just depends on whose history book you read, pretty much. Like,
Hmm.
that's really how it is. And I
Yep.
think that's why I liked him so much because he does seem like a bad guy. He is, I mean, to me, he is pretty. He's like just the things he enjoys. I think that's why he becomes kind of like more of the basic bad guys. He enjoys just really kind of debaucheries, but his motives are just kind of just I want expansion, I want power. And to me, yeah, I would say he's basic, but dang bummer. Look at
Yeah.
you, just freaking derailing my bad guys. I like complex bad guys, and here I am admitting that I love a very simple bad guy and I can't even rationalize myself out of it. I'm
I
bad at
mean,
this too.
I think it's reasonable, like maybe you have like a preference in one direction and maybe you've seen more stories that you like with a certain type.
I
I
think
think
the
that's
fault, I
totally
think
fair.
that's maybe that's the thing I like about the complex guys. The bad guys, there's not a lot of story. You can't have Baron Harkonnen
Mm,
be the main character because that would be a very boring book. But
not a lot of
Arthas would,
character development, right?
yeah, no, he's just the same dude, just streamlining the whole time. I think Arthas is good for that because it's like the tragic falling of a hero, right? Books are different than media because books you have to engage with the characters and you have to deal with them. Whereas in the
Hmm.
movie, it's like, oh, he's just a scumbag. It's kind of like Conan the Barbarian, dude. All those bad guys in that, they're just derpy bad for absolutely no reason. Just like James Earl Jones, just this super awesome dude. He's like, I'm killing people. Why we don't know and nobody knows, but we're doing it anyway. Shunk. Like, but like but that sword and sorcery is like really tropey for that, and people love it. They love that like all the mages are evil. Magic is generally evil. The hero is basically this half-naked buff barbarian or half-naked like chick running around in like G-strings and bikinis, just like slaying stuff. Like that's a whole other genre. But God, that's one where I would say those
What the
bad guys are so basic. Well, you know what I'm saying? Like, well, think about it. Like you have Conan the Barbarian, and then you have Red Sonja. Dude, have you like you've seen Red Sonja, right? Like you know what
I
that is?
haven't seen that. I haven't
Oh yeah,
seen
no
that.
wonder. Just look it up. Like all the comics is legit. I kid you not. This like redhead in a metal bikini. Like I'm not like saying that but to make it off the top of my head. Like this is literally go look up sword and sorcery like men and women. You'll see dudes in loincloths and like women in bikinis. Like it was just super tropey at the time and I think those were like the funniest bad guys because they're just evil for no reason. There's no explanation. There's no reasoning. They're just dirt bags and they're creepy and weird and it's awesome. It's kind of like your one I think it was Malazan you're talking about where they're just like those kind of gross swamp people or whatever. It's like, dude, just hits that old sword and sorcery kind of vibe for me. Should have worn my Conan the Barbarian shirt now. Missed out.
That's hilarious. That feels like
Sorry.
80s vibes. Well, let me ask you maybe a final question. Your latest book, how are you thinking about writing your villain?
Oh, so I've written my latest book because latest as in the one I'm writing now or the one that I just finished writing. What do you want me to use?
The one you're currently writing. I'm
So
curious.
the one I'm currently writing, I'm kind of like writing two, so I'll just throw both of them. One I thought would be interesting is having like a friendship where they're two friends, kind of like Naruto and Sasuke, but like you said, one goes evil, one goes good. And I thought that'd be cool to throw in like with kind of like a mech story because I don't read a lot of mech books out there, and I think kind of like a Gundam Seed book would be kind of cool. So I decided to. So they will be very complex. They're not going to be because you need to know like if they're going to be friends and they're going to fall apart, and he's going to go down the bad path or the good path. Why, right? Why did you choose this? Why didn't he choose this? And it's cool reasoning. I have some really cool reasoning, and it all has to do with piloting these mechs and kind of humanity and I think it's transhumanism. I think it's the word where
Hmm.
like humans integrate into technology. That's so they're going to be very complex because I feel like for that you need to see why they got pulled apart. So at the end, when they have that big conflict, it's going to have a bigger payoff. The other book, it's just going to be, it's a twist. It's more of a standard villain. You don't even know much about this villain until the very end of the book. Like you kind of like there's building on this villain throughout the whole book, obviously, but at the end there's some big reveals that I'm going to do where then you're like, oh, so that's where I get that kind of I do enjoy the complex villain because he did things for maybe not the greatest reasons, but it's kind of like in hindsight everything is 2020, right? You can be like, oh, that was a pretty bad choice I just made, but when you're like this book's kind of taking place in a feudal Japan, and so it's when you're in war and you're fighting and you're trying to even make your country survive through like a unification, um, you just have to sometimes you have to make split second decisions that end up being this like, oh, shouldn't have done that, but well, we did that, so and so I almost that's but this book that one has a lot of a almost a bit of a psychological component to it that I don't want to spoil too much, but it kind of builds on itself. Everything just really wraps up. And so, yeah, I'm kind of using a mixture of both. A little bit of a complex villain, very complex villain in the one book, and less complex in the other book. One that's kind of has some tropes, but also some just kind of he's a dirtbag guy at the same time. So, yeah. I
That's
think I write
interesting.
complex villains, dude. How do you write not complex villains? Can you just teach me this skill?
Well, I'm
Just
excited for
like I don't.
those. In
Yeah.
my book that I'm almost done with right now, it's sci-fi and
Hmm.
it's a little bit more like mysterious and then goes into not too complex. So it's
Hmm.
basically there's like humanity has expanded out to half of the galaxy and
Hmm.
there's like an invading alien group from another galaxy and humanity's basically like created super intelligent AIs like thousands of years ago. So a lot of their
Hmm.
society is like run by AIs. But then this
Hmm.
new group like has psychic powers that counteracts machines
Oh.
super heavily. And so
Mm.
the AI who like rules the human part of the galaxy, like genetically engineers a bunch of human super soldiers with like the best traits, just makes them all like
Oh.
super smart, like ridiculously resilient and all this. And then they go and like fight the aliens on their worlds. So it takes a while
Oh.
before like the climax of the first book is takes place when they first go to the alien world because they kind of have like
Oh,
different
wow.
interactions with them, but they finally go and like
Hmm.
launch the mission. And that's when you start to like understand them a little more. And then the more evil like rulers of this alien group will be
Hmm.
revealed like in later books.
Oh, that's cool.
So
I like that.
it's a little slower moving, but it's definitely like more of a basic theme in the beginning of just like defending your place
Hmm.
and like responding to being attacked first. But then there's like more
Okay.
complexity later of like not all of the aliens are bad, and
Okay.
then there's like some that are like going to be a lot more repulsive.
That's
So
really cool. So
yeah.
that's cool. So it's thematic for the book building tension, right? It's like a basic bad guy to convince people. Book two, book three, you're like, ooh, by the way, not as evil as we thought. I like that. I think that actually is probably the best way to do bad guys because it really hooks people into believing the cause in the first book, and then you're like, oh, son of a gun. Ooh,
Yeah,
I
we'll
like that.
see. We'll
I'm
see. I
excited
guess
to read it.
it will be more complex, I guess, as time goes on. But I feel like when you have a series, you kind of have to do that, you know? Or like you kind of need like a new threat every
Yeah,
single book. And so it's going to
they get
evolve over
boring if
time.
not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to
Yeah.
have complexity because if not, yeah, they can get pretty boring, like just the same old. It'll just turn to like the Jack Reacher books, dude. It's like the same. Literally, I think that dude has written like 100 Jack Reacher books, and it's like,
Man.
dude, my dad has read like 40 of them, and he's like, pretty much the same thing every time, but it's just cool. I'm like, dude, what the heck, man?
That's how I
That's
feel about
awesome,
James Bond
man.
too. The last couple
Dude,
James Bond
really.
movies have been very similar
But it's Daniel
villains.
Craig, dude. All we want to see is
I
Daniel Craig being dope and cool and running
It's
around
true.
with Bond babes. That's basically all it's been.
The point's not really the villain in those shows, I feel like.
No, dude, I feel like
Yeah.
half the thing with James Bond is just picking a new James Bond. Like all the news media coverage on that's so big. Yeah.
Just need to make it be
Your
Henry
series has
Cavill.
gotten so
Stop
legendary, no one really cares. Oh,
stop
Henry
playing with
Cavill.
us. Just give us Henry Cavill. That's what everyone wants. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
that it's true, it's
Well,
true. Anyway, that's funny.
anyway, that's our discussion on villains. Subscribe, like, comment your favorite villains, and check out our books if they sound interesting to you in the description.